Hello there, my weirdos. How are you today? I know the hair is a hot mess, but you're welcome. If you're new here, I'm Liz. This is Great Crime Time, where I'm your host. We're going to sit down and we're talking about some true crime. So, in part one of this video, we talked about the crime against Sylvia Likens, and I wanted to keep the indictments, the whole trial, and put it in a separate video because the first video was over 40 minutes long, and I wanted to make sure that you guys got everything you needed to know when it comes to this true crime case. So like I mentioned in part one of this video, the case against Sylvia Likens inspired the movie Girl Next Door, and in the month of April we are doing crime that inspired real life media, movies, music, all of the above. So, Sylvia Likens. We talked about her horrible murder and her funeral, and this case breaks my heart. It really does, because I just, why? Man. All right, so on the 30th of December of 1965, the Marion County Grand Jury returned with a first-degree murder indictment against Gertrude Baniszewski and two of her oldest three children. That's Paula and John Jr. Also, who were indicted was Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard. All were charged with repeatedly striking, beating, kicking, and otherwise inflicting a culmination of fatal injuries to Sylvia Likens with premeditated malice, which is another form of premeditated murder. So it's just malicious intent to hurt her. So about 3 weeks prior to filing the indictments against all five, Stephanie Baniszewski had been released from her custody because of habeas corpus bond, with help of her lawyer, her attorney. And with this bond, they successfully contended the state and said that they lacked sufficient evidence to support any charge of murder or culmination of fatal injuries to charge against her. So Stephanie waived her immunity from any potential prosecution that could happen, and she also agreed to testify against her family and the other individuals that fatally abused and murdered Sylvia. So there was a formal pretrial hearing on the 16th of March of 1966, and this is when several different psychiatrists testified before the judge. This is Judge Saul Isaac Robb, and they testified as to their conclusions regarding psychiatric evaluations that they conducted upon the main three, so Paula, Gertrude, and John Jr. They also testified that all three were completely competent to stand trial, so if any of them tried to do not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, that wouldn't stand because they had their own psychiatric evaluations done and they deemed them fit to stand trial. Yes. So also part of Paula's psychiatric evaluation, it detailed her indifference towards Sylvia. And basically it's that Paula represented a situation as one like the girl Sylvia had become quite withdrawn, and she was very negative in her behavior. To the extent of where she refused to eat and she showed no emotion. So Paula talked a lot about Sylvia in her psychiatric evaluation and the different things that upset her and why she treated her the way that she did. So the formal trial began April 18th of 1966. They were all tried by the same judge, Judge Rabb, at an Indianapolis city county building. So it wasn't actually in a courthouse. It was just in a regular county building for the city. The jury selection began on that date and took several days. The prosecution was Leroy K. New and Marjorie Wessner, and they announced their intention for the death penalty for all 5 defendants, and they announced this on April 16th, so 2 days before the trial actually began. They also successfully argued that all the defendants should be tried together, as they were ultimately charged with acting in concert, or they all worked together, and they argued this right in front of the judge. Because their collective crimes against Sylvia, if they were tried separately, neither a jury or a judge could hear testimony that could give the entire picture of what happened with all of the offenses that were committed against Sylvia. So each juror was questioned by counsel for both prosecution and defense. And basically they wanted to gauge them on how they felt about capital punishment, being just a penalty or first-degree murder, whether or not mother could be responsible for the welfare of her children or deportment of her children. The jurors that opposed any opposition of the death penalty were excused from duty. Any who either worked with children, they expressed any prejudice against an insanity defense, they were repulsed by actual horrific nature of Sylvia's death, were excused by defense counsels. So they were really picky when it came to the actual jury that presided over this case. So Gertrude was defended by a man named William Erbecker. Her daughter Paula was also defended by George Rice. Richard Hobbs, his lawyer was James G. Netter. John Jr. and Coy Hubbard were defended by Forrest Bauman. Now, the attorneys for Richard, Coy, Paula, and John claimed that they'd been pressured into participating in Sylvia's torment by Gertrude. Gertrude herself pled not guilty because of being insane. So, one of the first witnesses to testify on behalf of the prosecution was the deputy coroner. His name is Charles Ellis. He testified on the 29th. And he testified to that of what Sylvia had endured, the intense pain she had suffered, talking about how her fingernails were broken backwards, numerous deep cuts that were on her body, punctures that covered her entire body, that her lips were essentially shredded from her face due to her repeatedly biting them and chewing on them. He also testified to the fact that Sylvia had been in such a state of acute shock and for a period of 2 to 3 days prior to her death. So, and that because of the state of how advanced her shock was, her body completely resisted any form of treatment in her final hours before she died. And although he emphasized the extensive swelling in and around her vaginal cavity, Sylvia's body didn't bear any sign of direct sexual molestation except for the severe swelling of her genitalia. So there was no other signs indicating that she was sexually molested other than nether regions. So on May 2nd and May 3rd, this is when Jenny testified, Sylvia's sister. She testified against all 5 defendants, and she stated that they had each repeatedly and extensively, both physically and emotionally, abused her and her sister, stating that Sylvia did nothing to provoke any of these assaults. There was no truth in either the rumors that they were spreading or any of the slurs that were made against either Jenny or Sylvia. During her testimony as well, Jenny stated that her and her sister, she stated when the abuse started happening. It was about 2 weeks after they moved in with Gertrude. And that the abuse her sister endured was very forced and it escalated very fast. Sylvia, on occasion, had been unable to produce tears due to her acute state of dehydration. That's how little fluid her body had. During her time on the stand, Jenny burst into tears as any mourning family member would. And she specifically burst into tears when she talked about the days just before Sylvia died and how she had said to her, "Jenny, I know you don't want me to die, but I'm going to die. I can tell it." That right there, I don't know how anybody could say that with a straight face. Like, I just said it with a straight face, and it's taking me a lot to not cry thinking about what this little girl went through. And especially for her sister to say that on the witness stand, that's heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. So there are sections of Jenny's testimony that were later corroborated by Randy Lepper. He also stated that he once witnessed Sylvia crying, but she actually didn't shed any tears. He also testified having been witnessed of Stephanie's abuse against Sylvia and how she struck her really hard after Gertrude ordered her to remove her clothing in Randy's presence. He then smirked as he confessed to having beaten Sylvia himself on anywhere between 10 to 40 different occurrences. On May 10th, this is when a Baptist minister, his name is Roy Julian, he testified to knowing that there was a girl being abused in the Baniszewski household, and although he failed to report the information to the authorities, he had been informed by Gertrude that Sylvia had made advances to men for money. So another false accusation by Gertrude against Sylvia. And he had believed that the girl had been punished for her solicitation of sex, basically. So that same day, there was a 13-year-old. Her name is Judy Duke. She also testified. She admitted to witnessing Sylvia once enduring a salt scrub. Now, the salt scrub was added to her legs, the open wounds on her legs, and the salt was added scrubbed onto her legs until she screamed. Judy also testified that there was one occasion where she saw 10-year-old Shirley Baniszewski rip open Sylvia's blouse, to which Richard Hobbs then had a remark that everybody's going to have fun with Sylvia. Now, the following day after this is when Gertrude testified in her own defense. She denied any responsibility for the prolonged abuse, torment, and death of Sylvia. She also claimed that her children and other children within the neighborhood must have committed the acts in her home. She described that her house was a madhouse. She also added that she had been too preoccupied with her own ill health and depression to control her own children. Lady, I'm a 30-year-old woman. I juggle 5 different jobs. I have cracked out mental health, and I handle my shit pretty well. I don't know what the fuck you were doing, but you didn't have to take it out on a 15-year-old girl. All I gotta say. So, in response to the initial questioning where she said that she had no tie to the abuse, Gertrude claimed that although she had to spank Sylvia on one occasion, she was emotionally unable to do so, and that she had not hit any other child on any further occasion. She denied any knowledge of Sylvia ever enduring any beatings, spankings, scaldings, brandings, burnings within her own home. So, 2 days after Gertrude goes on the witness stand, this is when Richard Hobbs testifies. So he describes how Gertrude had called Sylvia into the kitchen on October 23rd, stated that you have branded my children, so now I'm going to brand you. This is after she dubs Paula, and says that she was a prostitute in school. And this is when she starts etching the insult into Sylvia's abdomen. And Richard, his testimony is very damning when it comes to Gertrude, because unlike Paula, Richard has nothing to lose because basically he's already lost his life due to this woman, this crazy woman. So he admits to what Gertrude did to Sylvia. He testified that this act of branding that she does to the abdomen had brought blood to the surface of her flesh, and that Sylvia had begged him to stop the branding. He remained adamant to the section of the branding that he inflicted and said that it was light compared to what Gertrude had done. Richard also further testified that he initially believed that Sylvia would not be at the Baniszewski household on October 26th, as Gertrude said that she intended to get rid of Sylvia the day prior. He also stated that after Sylvia's death, he simply returned home to watch the rest of the Lloyd Thaxton show. So Marie Baniszewski was called to the witness stand as a witness for the defense. She broke down, absolutely broke down. She admitted that she had heated the needle that caused the brand on her abdomen, that Richard was forced to use per ruling of Gertrude. Marie also testified as to Gertrude's indifference to Sylvia and basically the evident distress that Sylvia had when it came to the physical and mental abuse that she increasingly suffered. She also testified due to her mother's knowledge of what was happening and stating on one occasion that Gertrude had sat up in a chair. She watched a neighborhood girl walk by. This was a girl named Anna Cisco, and she watched Anna Cisco attack Sylvia. Marie also added that all 5 of the defendants had repeatedly physically and mentally tormented Sylvia, and that Marie herself was the one that witnessed most of these occasions, especially the ones where it was just Gertrude and Paula committing these acts. And these were the acts that were committed before Gertrude forced Sylvia into the basement, where further abuse escalated and she ultimately died in the basement. There was another witness, her name is Grace Sargent, and she stated how she sat close to Paula on the church bus and had heard her openly bragging and boasting about breaking her own wrist due to striking Sylvia in the face. This was on August 1st. Grace also testified that Paula finished her boasting by stating, "I tried to kill her." Why would you do that on a church bus? Why? I get that you're so proud of yourself for almost killing this girl, but why on a church bus? Why? Anywho, on the 16th of May, this is when the court-appointed doctor, his name is Dwight Schuster, he testified on behalf of the prosecution. He was questioned by Leroy New, which was one of the attorneys for the defense, as to how exhaustive the interviews and assessments were when it came to assessing Gertrude. And Dr. Schuster stated, although she was evasive and uncooperative, he testified due to his belief that he believed that Gertrude was sane and fully competent and in control of her actions, and she had been sane in October of 1965, and she remained sane until this current date, which was May 16th of 1966. Dr. Schuster also stated how he was subjected to over 2 hours of intense cross-examination by Gertrude's lawyers, William Erbecker, although he remained very clear with the fact that he knew Gertrude was not and has never been psychotic. She had never gone through a psychotic break. She was completely sane the entire time. So, the deputy prosecutor, her name is Marjorie Wessner, she delivered the state's closing statements before the jury on behalf of the prosecution. And each defendant was impassive except for Richard. And this was during the recount of the continuous mistreatment that Sylvia endured prior to her death. Now, Marjorie Wessner was really good at emphasizing that at no point Sylvia had either provoked any of the defendants or received any medical care beyond occasionally having margarine rubbed into scalded sections of her face and body. So this reference is a specific form of means of neglect and abuse at the defendant's hands, and their failure absolute failure to help Sylvia and to deter each other from mistreating her. Wessner also described the abuse as stomach-wrenching and compared the abuse she received at the hands of all 5 defendants as being equally as severe as the ones committed against the prisoners in Nazi concentration camps. That's a pretty damning statement for the deputy prosecutor to say in a closing argument. So she also referenced the premeditated nature of Sylvia's death. She pointed the jury's attention to the notes that Gertrude had forced Sylvia to write on October 24th, stating that Gertrude knew on October 24th that she was going to hold the notes until the rest of the defendants had completed the murder of Sylvia. She also was holding a portrait of Sylvia, which these portraits were taken before July of 1965. And Marjorie also added, saying that, "I wish she was here today, with eyes, as in the picture, full of hope and anticipation, wishing that Sylvia was alive." So they were really good at really getting at the jury. So during closing arguments, the deputy prosecutor, she also showed the pictures of Sylvia's face and talked about how there was no fat on her body. She hadn't eaten for a week. We'll never know the true pain and suffering that she endured. And the best evidence to show is that of a picture of her lips, where her lips were literally bitten to shreds because of Sylvia trying to hold back her screams. And that was her only way of getting through what she was going through, was biting her lips. So the defense really tried to deliver in their closing arguments. So the one that really did it was William Erbecker. He attempted to portray his client as being insane, which clearly we've already heard from the doctor she's not insane. And he claimed that she was unable to appreciate the severity or the criminality of her actions, stating that, "I condemn her for being a murderess. That's what I do. But I say she's not responsible because she's not all there." Dude, you just said that she's a murderess. And we have scientific evidence from a psychiatrist that she's not insane. She's just using you. Erbecker then tap his head as he emphasized on the reference to her mental state. And also then said, if she was sane, then put her in the electric chair. I can't stand when defense attorneys say stuff like this, because you're damning your own client. You really are. You really are. So it wasn't just William Erbecker that talked in the closing arguments. The other lawyers did too. Forrest Bowman began his closing argument openly critical about the manner of which, prosecution wanted to seek the death penalty for the juveniles. And he stated that, "I would like to have an hour of the jury's time to explain why 13-year-olds and 16-year-olds shouldn't be put to death." He refrained from acknowledging the heinous crimes that were committed against Sylvia, and he repeatedly emphasized the kids' ages, and stating that they were only guilty of assault and battery before seeking a verdict of not guilty on them. George Rice began his closing argument basically stating that Paula was under a ruse, if you will, and that she did not act in the actual murder, and that the evidence that was presented was not adequate. He closed his argument with a plea for the jury to return a verdict of not guilty on a girl who had gone through the indignity of being tried in an open court. James Netter spoke in defense of Richard Hobbs, referring to the loss of Sylvia, saying that she had the right to live, that he cannot remember somebody that has sinned so much, sinned against and was abused. He referred to Richard's courage in openly testifying to the savage, like him openly testifying and being like questioned, the relentless cross-examination to which he was subjected to by Leroy New. Mr. Netter also attempted to portray his client as a person that was just a follower type and that he acted under the control of Gertrude, which I mean is kind of true. He suggested that the part that James carved in her abdomen was at Gertrude's request, which we know she forced him to do it. Richard also, he could have been another state's witness along with Stephanie, but he ended up not being one. He also talked about Jenny's overall failure to notify the authorities when it came to the abuse against her sisters until she died. And she described her as a sister who could limp 3.5 miles to a park, but couldn't take 2 to 3 steps into a New York street to beg for help. Which, I mean, it's a low blow, but Jenny was afraid for her life. So there was a rebuttal that happened where it went back into what happened to Sylvia and everything that they found during her autopsy. And basically just like sticking it to the man. And just hardcore sticking it to him. So the trial of these defendants lasted 17 days before the jury went to deliberate for their verdict. So on May 19th of 1966, after they deliberated for about 8 hours, the panel was composed of 8 men and 4 women. They found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder. They recommended a sentence of life imprisonment. Paula was found of second-degree murder, found guilty. Hobbs, Hubbard, and John Jr. were found guilty of manslaughter. So upon the judge speaking of these verdicts, Gertrude and her children burst into tears and attempted to console each other, whereas Hobbs and Hubbard, so Richard and Coy, they remained they were in shock. They didn't know what to do. So on May 25th, Gertrude and Paula were formally sentenced to life in prison. The same day, Richard, Coy, and John received 2 to 21 year sentences that would be served at an Indiana reformatory. There were retrials that were tried due to the fact that they felt that it wasn't a fair trial. So in September of 1970, this is when they reversed the convictions of Gertrude and Paula on the basis that the judge denied repeatedly submitted motions by the defense counsel in the original trial. And this was them wanting to change the venue and have separate trials. The pair were then retried in 1971. Paula opted to plead to voluntary manslaughter rather than face a retrial. She was sentenced to serve a term of 2 to 20 years in prison for her part in Sylvia's death. She also tried to escape prison twice in 1971. She was released, though, in 1972, which is the fucked up part. So Gertrude, however, was convicted of first-degree murder again, and then she was sentenced to life in prison. So over the course of the following 14 years after the retrial, so this brings us to 1985, Gertrude then became a model citizen, a model prisoner at the Indiana Women's Prison. She worked in the sewing shop. She was known as being a den mother for the female inmates, especially the younger ones. A lot of them called her mom. And by the time Gertrude's parole came up, which was in 1985, she had changed her name to Nadine Van Fossen, which is a combination of her middle name and her maiden name. And she then described herself as being a devout Christian. So society went nuts when she was paroled. Absolutely went nuts. Jenny and the other immediate Likens family protested her being released. There was also 2 members of anti-crime groups that traveled to Indiana to oppose the potential parole of Gertrude and to publicly support the Likens family. They also initiated a sidewalk picket campaign. Over the course of 2 months, they collected over 40,000 signatures from the citizens of Indiana. This included signatures that were obtained from outraged citizens who were too young and contemporarily recollect the case. So a lot of them didn't really understand or didn't really know. All of the signatures that were gathered demanded that Gertrude remain incarcerated for the remainder of her life. So at her parole hearing, Gertrude stated that her wish for Sylvia's death could be undone. Although she kind of like her responsibility for her actions, she kind of minimized it. She stated that, "I'm not sure what role I had in Sylvia's death because I was on drugs. I never really knew her, and I take full responsibility for what happened to Sylvia." So finally, she puts on her big girl panties and admits responsibility for what happens to Sylvia. So because she was such a nice lady in prison, they take that into account, and the parole board marginally voted in favor of her granted parole. She was released from prison on the 4th of December of 1985. So following her release, this is when Gertrude relocates to Iowa. She never fully accepted the true responsibility for the prolonged torment when it came to Sylvia and her death. Like, yes, she said that she took full responsibility when she was at her parole board hearing, but that really doesn't mean anything. She could have just been saying it because she wanted to get out, which is a total possibility. Now, Gertrude, she lived in a very rural town in Laurel, Iowa, until she died due to lung cancer, and this happened on June 16th of 1990. She was only 61. So after the news of her death broke, and the issues that were raised due to her sanity during both trials, a man named John Dean, he was a former reporter for the Indianapolis Star. He provided extensive coverage for this case, and he stated in 2015, "I never thought she was insane. I thought she was a downtrodden, mean woman." So he also stated that this case was like the Lord of the Flies. Although Sylvia's increased physical and emotional abuse was not the result of children going wild, it was children doing what they were told because Gertrude told them to. So he also talked about the actual motive for Gertrude doing this, and he believes that because she had a miserable life, she was ultimately absolutely jealous of Sylvia because she was an attractive young girl. She was very bright. She was a very pious girl, and it's everything Gertrude wasn't. Not to sound like a bitch, but it was everything that Gertrude wasn't. Here she was. She had 6 kids. She had a lot of kids by different dudes. Married twice to the same guy. One of your baby daddies ran out on you, and that was from your youngest child. And she was never happy. She was living off the state, never happy, in this big old house with all your kids. I wouldn't be surprised if she had postpartum depression. Because back then it wasn't really a thing that was really known about. And due to her mindset, having had all these kids, having the father figure for her kids kind of walk in and out, be a revolving door, it does do a lot to your brain. And here she is, she's a single mom trying to raise all these kids. She doesn't know how to. She's constantly hard on herself. It's hard to say exactly, and I'm not defending this woman. It's really hard to say what exactly was going through her brain, because she's dead. We're never gonna fully know. She died. She died before my mom was even pregnant with me. So it's been a long ass time. So after Paula's 1972 parole, she assumed a new identity. This pisses me off, okay? And the reason why it pisses me off is because after she changed her name, she started working as an aide to a school counselor for 14 years at the Bowman Conrad Liscum Union Witten Community School in Conrad, Iowa. She changed her name to Paula Pace, concealing the truth regarding her criminal history when she applied for this position. So she falsified her information so she could work at a school. That pisses me off because I'm sorry. There's a reason why they do background checks. They fingerprint you when you try and work at a school. And she was fired for this when the school discovered who she really was. She reportedly still lives in a small town. She's married and she has 2 children. Now, she was pregnant when all of this was happening with Sylvia. She did give birth while she was being tried in 1966. And the baby was named after her mother, so her baby was named Gertrude. But baby was adopted out. So the murder charges that were filed against the second child, Stephanie, were ultimately dropped after she agreed to turn the state, she agreed to testify on behalf of the state and turn the evidence against the other defendants. Although the prosecutors wanted to retry or resubmit their case against Stephanie before a grand jury in 1966, the decision to later prosecute her in a separate trial was never fully materialized. Stephanie assumed a new name, and she also worked in the school, in the school systems. She became a school teacher. She later married, and she had several children. She kept her real first name. I'm not going to say her last name, and she currently still lives in Florida. So when questioned at the trial as to her motive for turning the state's evidence, she said, "I'm just here and hope I can help anybody." And this is when her mother's attorney sneered at her and said, "Including yourself?" Man, how the fuck can you do that to a young kid? I get it. Not all children are equally as innocent. But man, the rage that could have been behind that man. I wish I was alive to see this. I wish I could read the full transcripts of this case. I wish. Because I just want to know how snarky the remarks are in this case. Yeah. So shortly after their mother was arrested, this is when Marie, Shirley, and James were placed in separate foster families. All the surnames of all 3 children was legally changed to Blake in the late 1960s after their father regained custody of them. Marie later married. She died of natural causes June 8th of 2017. She was 62. Dennis Lee Wright, which is the youngest in this case. So, yeah, Gertrude's youngest child. He was later adopted. His adoptive mother kind of kept his name. So his name is Denny Lee. He died on February 5th, 2012 at the age of 47. Richard, Coy, and John each served less than 2 years in the Indiana Reformatory before being granted parole on February 27th of 1968. Richard Hobbs died of lung cancer June 2nd of 1972, and he was 21. This is less than 4 years after he was released. So he was released in 1968, and he died in 72. He was a month and a half shy of being out of jail for 4 years. So in the span between him being released and him dying, he was known to have had numerous breakdowns because of what he had helped the rest of them do. Coy Hubbard remained in Indiana and never changed his name. Throughout his adult life, he was repeatedly imprisoned for various different criminal offenses. He was charged in 1977 with the murder of 2 young men. He was ultimately acquitted of this charge. Shortly after January of 2007, there was a crime drama film that was released, An American Crime, and Coy was fired from his job due to this because American Crime, now if you've never seen it, it's a movie starring Elliot Page and Catherine Keener, and this is about the murder of Sylvia Likens. So this is another movie that is based on this, other than A Girl Next Door. And he was fired from his job because they found out that he was involved in her murder. He ultimately died of a heart attack when he was in Shelbyville, Indiana. This was when he was 56 years old. So John Jr., he ended up going under the alias of John Blake. He became a minister, and he frequently hosted counseling sessions for children of divorced parents. Several decades after his release, he issued a statement in which he acknowledged the fact that him and his co-defendants should have been served to a more severe punishment. He also stated that young criminals are not beyond rehabilitation, and he described how he eventually became a productive citizen. I mean, he became a lay minister, and he started helping people. He did die of diabetes or complications from diabetes at the Lancaster General Hospital on May 19th of 2005, and he was 52. So prior to his death, he had occasionally spoken publicly about his past. He really enjoyed the attention that the murder brought upon him, and he claimed to only have ever hit Sylvia once. So Jenny, Sylvia's sister, she later married a Indianapolis native. She had 2 children, and she remained traumatized by the abuse for the rest of her life. And for the remainder of her life, Jenny had to supplement with anxiety medication due to her constant anxiety about what happened and her trauma. Because if you don't understand what it's like living with anxiety from a trauma perspective, it's very hard to live a day-by-day life. It's very hard. It's very hard to manage, especially if you don't medicate for it. If you do medicate for it, it's just as easily as hard, because you're trying to redirect your brain in a way to not think about such abuse. And I also want to clarify, if anybody comments saying that I don't know what abuse is like, you can look at my comment on the Amy Carnival case, or I'll just pin it in the comment down below. You can't assume what I've been through in life, and I will never assume what you've been through in life. This is my perspective on this case, so you have no right to judge me. But anywho, Jenny did die on June 23rd of 2004 from a heart attack. She was 54 at the time. 14 years before her death, though, she had viewed Gertrude's obituary in the newspaper. She clipped a section from the newspaper, then mailed it to her mom, accompanying a note saying, "Some good news. Damn old Gertrude died. Ha ha ha. I'm happy about that." So her parents, Betty and Lester, they died in 1998 and 2013. In the years prior to her own death, Jenny, again, she emphasized no blame should be placed on either of her parents for placing her and Sylvia in the hands of Gertrude, saying that her parents had done all that they could, and they trusted Gertrude's promise to actually care for them until they returned from the traveling carnival. The house in which this happened stood vacant for many years after the death of Sylvia and the rest of the tormentors. The property gradually became dilapidated. Although there was discussions of possibly purchasing and rehabilitating the house and converting it into a women's shelter, the necessary funds to complete this project was never raised, and the house itself was demolished on April 23rd of 2009. The site of which the house is now a church parking lot. There is a memorial that is dedicated to Sylvia, and it is at Willard Park on Washington Street in Indianapolis. It's a 6-foot-tall granite memorial for her, and it's really pretty, really, really pretty. There's a picture of her on it. It's basically just like like an awkward triangle with a circle on it and a picture of her, and it says the Sylvia Likens Memorial, and it was unveiled in 2001. So basically what has happened since Sylvia's death is that her death is credited with the adoption for Indiana's law of like a mandated reporter when it comes to stuff like this, and actual recognition of abuse. So a mandated reporter is people who have regular contact with vulnerable children, which is something not a lot of states have. Especially, I can attest to this in the state of New Hampshire when it comes to all these kids that have gone missing. Elijah and Harmony, there was no mandated reporter when it came to their cases because their cases were in DCF and DHHS. Like there is not a designated or mandated reporter in a lot of states. And I'm really happy that Indiana has these because it helps when it comes to the welfare of a child. And this citizen in particular is expected to report the abuse to authorities, and they have the legal obligation to. And if they don't report it, they will become incarcerated because it's falsifying information. So on October 26th of 2015, Sylvia and Jenny's older sister, Diana, she ended up gathering numerous Indianapolis citizens, and they honored Sylvia. They reflected upon her life in the 50th anniversary of her death, and to honor all of the children who have lost their lives due to abuse. And at the memorial service, this is when Diana informed those who were present that Sylvia's legacy must always be remembered. The tragic murder and abuse must always be remembered. There is an advocacy center, and it is the Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center that was officially dedicated in memory of Sylvia Likens. This was founded in 2010 in Lebanon, Indiana. This was initially called the Boone County Child Advocacy Center. It's a nonprofit that was renamed in Sylvia's honor in 2016. The executive director of this nonprofit stated that the most important thing that we can do is to tell our kids they are hurt and we are listening. This person also went on to stating that what happened to Sylvia is something that should never happen. Her family is very thankful though, and doesn't have to be that way anymore. She did not die in vain. She did die a horrific death, and because of that, we're hoping that they can save another child. This advocacy center, such a hard word to say. This advocate center, we'll say it like that, was formed with the objective to assist children that were victims of abuse and neglect, and to minimize the ongoing trauma effects that would be a result of their ordeal. And they are very relentless when it comes to preventing child abuse in Boone and Montgomery County. Professionals at the Advocate Center work both with law enforcement and local departments of child services. They also conduct forensic interviews and provide assistance with legal procedures and counsels, as well as mental and medical health referrals. So, like I said, The Girl Next Door is loosely based on the murder of Sylvia Likens. That was released in 2007. And then we have American Crime, which is the 2000 film based upon the murder of Sylvia as well. Yes, this case was on Investigation Discovery. There was a documentary that focused on the abuse and murder of her as a part of a true life crime documentary series. And this series was called Deadly Woman. And this one in particular was called Born Bad, and that came out on November 30th of 2009. So that, my friends, is the trial and culmination of the Sylvia Likens case. My thoughts on this case is, justice was served, but it wasn't served properly. I do agree that their sentences could have been more harsh. Rehabilitation, yes, is a thing, but sometimes it's not fully a thing when it comes to some of these people that are committing these crimes. The only way for somebody to learn that what they did was wrong is to force them into rehabilitation. This is why supermax jails are a thing. Jails and prisons were made to rehabilitate those who commit crimes, not for them to just be like, oh, hey, I have free rent for a month and I get free food every day. Or like, Jesus, the county jail that's right around the corner from us. They get to use tablets. I'm sorry, no. You in jail, you ain't got shit. You work for what you want. This is why you have a fund. You work in the prison. You do the laundry. You cook the food. You clean your areas. I know COVID has done wonders when it comes to prisons, but damn, you're in jail to rehabilitate yourself, not to have a free ride. Anywho, I hope you guys learned something from this horrific crime, and I will see you guys tomorrow in a brand new video. Bye, you guys.